Well, I don't know if there's any members of the General Assembly here. I know the former one in Whit Clement. Wherever the members of the General Assembly are, good to see you and President Duval and Secretary, Delegate, Chairman of the Board, Whit Clement. Greg, thank you for that very kind introduction. And thank all of y'all. Good morning to each and every one of you. It is an invigorating pleasure to be with all of you all who are the real innovators, the real job creators in Virginia and leaders really for our nation. Greg, thank you for that really kind introduction, and it just reminded me that's going to fit into my remarks here. And you know, you're talking about the things we did while I was governor, and listening to Whit talk about competitiveness. That's the attitude we need to have. We need to make sure that Virginia or America is the best place for people to invest, create jobs, for people to raise a family and succeed and achieve their dreams here in America. And I've always felt that the best social program of all is a job. If people have a job, they're taking care of themselves. They're providing for their families. And so we need to make sure that those policies are in place. And Barry Duval, heading up CEO, president of the Virginia Chamber, is one who's done it. He's done it at the statewide level. I first got to know Barry when he was mayor of Newport News. And economic development's a team effort. You can't do it just at the state level or the federal level. Local level matters a great deal in permitting. And Newport News was always just so much pro-business, and you were a great leader there as well as the state. And I think we're all very fortunate to have you as the head of the Voice of Business in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Barry. And I also congratulate the Chamber on what you're doing. You're working with local chambers. This meeting is great to bring in the Northern Virginia Technology Council, which is obviously a vibrant organization of innovators, and the Northern Virginia Transportation Alliance, which is also affected by what the federal government's doing. Now, the speech here is supposed to be about the federal government's role in Virginia's economic prosperity. Naturally, I'm amending that to how the federal government can actually have a positive role in Virginia's economic prosperity. And I look, the government doesn't create jobs. You do. The government's role, whether it's a state government or a federal government, is to have the right conditions precedent for people to invest, to create jobs, and thereby provide prosperity. And those are the conditions precedent that I know all of us, I would hope, believe in. I think the federal government ought to be focused on its primary responsibility, which is national security, national defense issues. The federal government ought to make sure that we have the right conditions so that you and other businesses can succeed with pro-growth policies that give America a competitive advantage for investment and therefore more American jobs and prosperity. I hear from business leaders, particularly from small business leaders, to be honest with you, and large, about where they see this country going. I was speaking down in Southside Virginia at the Emporia Greensville Chamber of Commerce this past summer. And one fellow who has a real estate business said, I'm really worried about my grandchildren and whether they're going to have the same sort of opportunities that we had. And he gave me his pen. His name was Mr. Horn. And so I asked the audience, I said, how many of you all are leading a better life than did your parents? Heck, I'll ask you all this. Think of this big one. How many of you all here are leading a better life than did your parents, if you'd raise your hands? Well, that's everyone. How many of you all truly believe that your children will have better opportunities in life than you had? A few, yeah. It's about the same. They're just a little bit more optimistic here, but still, that's what I hear from people, whether you're in Southwest Virginia, whether you're in Tidewater, whether you're here in Northern Virginia or everywhere in between, and they're worried about the future of our country. And whether the business is a small business, medium-sized, or large, a lot of them are reluctant to hire. They're reluctant to expand. They're reluctant to invest because what they see coming out of Washington seems to be against them. Whether it's pending higher taxes or stifling regulations, counterproductive energy policy, these healthcare mandates are really tough on retail businesses, restaurants, small businesses around 50 to 150 employees. These are just big worries that make them reluctant to hire. And there are some who do want to double down on these failed policies. However, most Virginians who I talk to envision a better future, and I agree with them. And the good news is we can start our creative engines for America's comeback and provide more jobs and restore the promise of the American dream. And there are proven solutions to it. As Greg said in the introduction, when I became governor of Virginia, I said I wanted the world to know that Virginia was open for business. That's the attitude we need to have. And what we need to do is reinvigorate the entrepreneurial spirit of our country. And that means you have to have competitive tax policies, common sense regulations, productive energy policies, and quality education, the latter which is primarily a state and local responsibility. Now, one place where the federal government impedes all of us is the tax policies. In the United States, the federal government imposes on job-creating businesses the second worst, the second highest tax in the entire world, at 35%. If we reduce, the international average is 25%. My view is America should be better than average. And so I think we ought to reduce that tax to 20%. Independent studies show that would create over 500,000 jobs a year. That's 5 million new jobs over a 10-year period. If you wanted to send a message to the world that America's open for business again, that would send a message. It's good for small businesses, medium and large businesses, that America wants to be competitive and not have burdensome taxation or uncompetitive taxation. Secondly, what we need to do is really rein in some of the overreach of the federal government. Make sure that regulations that are coming out of Washington are reasonable and balanced and based on common sense, and not so burdensome that they put our businesses, our entrepreneurs, at a competitive disadvantage. And we're seeing from stormwater to energy to healthcare, just an onslaught of new and threatened regulations and mandates coming out of Washington, which are stifling our economy. And I think what we need to do, and I know there's some legislators here, Tom Rust and you were, the unelected, unaccountable bureaucracies are not how our representative democracy ought to operate. And my view is if there's any regulation that has an economic impact of over $100 million on our economy, members of Congress ought to vote on those. So there'll be tough votes, no question about it. But your elected representatives should be making those decisions, not abdicating that responsibility to unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. And we really don't need Washington telling us what kind of light bulbs we ought to buy. We can make these decisions ourselves. Unfortunately, the GE light bulb factory in Winchester is now out of business, and we're importing light bulbs from Mexico and ones with mercury from China from it. The other thing is that we don't need to have a government telling Americans what they have to buy in every business, what kind of government prescribed health insurance they have to have, which is a major impediment for hiring people unless they're one of those who are favored with a waiver from that healthcare monstrosity. Now, the other thing that the federal government has no business doing or being involved in is telling a business where they can locate. Boeing, a company, in a free country. Look, folks, you can move to North Carolina, you can move to Tennessee if you wanted to. Heck, you can move to Maryland if you wanted to. We have freedom of movement in this country. And Virginia, but I know this as governor, and Barry, you know this, and companies that we recruited to Newport News, and there's companies all up and down the Interstate 81 corridor, and Bobby Kilberg knows this as well when we're working on companies to bring forth our Silicon Dominion. The fact that Virginia is the furthest state north on the eastern seaboard with a right to work law gives us a great competitive advantage. And the federal government has no right to tell a company that they cannot invest and make airplanes or anything else in a right to work state. And I think it's absolutely essential that we stand strong together in protecting our right to work laws. This sends the wrong message of the federal government suing them. Now, to promote, I think, prosperity in Virginia, I think we need to rein in the National Labor Relations Board, guarantee freedom of movement for American businesses. I have what I call a freedom to work agenda, and that includes retiring these Davis-Bacon wages, their wage laws that are from the days of the Depression, and do away with mandated project labor agreements as well, because what they cause is less competitive bidding. We see a lot of that, not just in the Hampton Roads area, but particularly here in the Northern Virginia area. because 95% of the contractors in Virginia are non-union. So if you have these higher wages on it, they don't bid on it. So a lot of the jobs go to out-of-state contractors here. Now, beyond that, think of the taxpayers. There's a premium of about 22% when you have to have these Davis-Bacon wages. That means we're getting less bang for the buck. So rather than 10 miles of road being resurfaced, you end up with 8 miles of road being resurfaced. Then on the metro extension, that could mean that the toll road users on the Dulles Toll Road will have to pay unnecessarily high tolls because of these requirements from the federal government when they're involved in these projects. So I think it's really important that we utilize our liberty in Virginia to our advantage, that no working man or working woman should be forced to pay $700 a year in union dues as a condition of keeping or getting a job, and do away with these artificially high wages you have to pay in federal government projects. Now, as far as transportation, there are a lot of needs in Virginia. One of the things the federal government could do and help us is allow us to explore for oil and gas off our coast. This is something Virginians are for. And there's a precedent that the states would get 37.5% of the royalties. I have suggested and urged through the years that ought to go to roads and transportation, those royalties for the safe exploration off our coast. Unfortunately, the federal government, the Obama administration, said no to Virginia, slamming the door just a little less than a month ago, once again saying that we cannot explore for oil and gas off our coast. Meanwhile, the federal government has lent $2 billion to the state-owned oil company of Brazil for them to explore for oil and gas off their coast. And the president said we want to be good customers. Well, I know the people of Virginia, from Southwest Virginia and the coal fields all the way to our ports, are willing, ready, and able to provide the energy to power America. And my friends, this counterproductive policies on energy in our country are punishing to families and small businesses. If the federal government would unleash our energy resources, I know there's a lot of folks here who love all their sports teams, and all the fans all like to say we're number one. Well, you know, America is number one when it comes to energy resources. Russia's second, Saudis and China are third and fourth. Our government looks at these resources as a curse. We ought to look at our resources as a blessing. And if we unleash our American energy resources, hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs would be created. We'd have more affordable energy. Our companies would be more competitive. It would help our balance of trade. It's a national security issue. We'd keep the money here in the United States of America, and the federal government could get over $1 trillion in revenues without raising taxes. So, my friends, we have the resources under our land and under our water. We have the resources and the creativity of the American people. What is missing is the political will to unleash them, and I think it's high time that we unleashed America's energy resources to improve the lives and opportunities of Americans and stop being vulnerable to outside forces because of our counterproductive policies. Now, beyond removing the barriers from Washington on energy, I agree with what you said, Barry, on the super committee. I read this letter you wrote in October. You emphasized the need to reduce the federal deficit, but doing so in a fashion that does, I quote, does not undermine our fragile economy and harming our national security. All of us are disappointed. I'm not surprised, but still disappointed by the failure of the super committee. One of the reasons I was against it is the potential dangerous cuts to national security and the men and women who are protecting our freedom, and obviously in the process threatening Virginia jobs. The safety of our men and women in our armed forces is a paramount responsibility of our federal government. It can't be jeopardized by Washington's inability to do its job and live within its means. And I know Congressman Forbes is going to be speaking in great detail on it. I associate myself with Congressman Forbes' remarks. But national defense, it's constitutionally the top responsibility of the federal government. I think that Virginia's capabilities converge perfectly with the top responsibility of the federal government and our most pressing national security challenges, including cybersecurity, missile defense, the need to project our power, and keeping the sea lanes open. We're blessed in Virginia to have bases for every branch of the military. We have the largest naval base in Norfolk, the CIA, the Pentagon, the National Counterterrorism Center, as well as veteran care centers throughout Virginia. We have the best thing on top of it all is we have skilled men and women in shipbuilding, satellites, communications, analytics, systems, nanotechnology, and all sorts of companies, small, medium, and large, who obviously can provide these quality services to our military as well as other federal agencies. And a lot of these businesses I know are represented here this morning, and a lot of you all are making adjustments on account of Washington's current failures. Now, one of the failures is they haven't adopted a budget, and I think it's now about 930 days in the U.S. Senate. That's 2.5 years. They're already this year on the second continuing resolution. None of y'all could ever run your businesses, your household this way. And it's just really tough for contractors, particularly small contractors, to see what's going on. What ought to be done is they really ought to adopt budgets on time. If you all don't get your projects done on time, how many contractors do we have here, if you raise your hands? All right, if you don't get your job done on time, do you get paid? No, neither should members of Congress. If they don't get the appropriations bills done on time, their pay ought to be withheld. We just need to get back to basics. And the way they're doing it is so inefficient and wrong. So I think there's some things that can be said, but I want to open it up for a few questions. But let me just say this in closing before I take some questions from y'all. Virginia and America succeeds when you succeed. And I think that these are proven solutions. They will work. These are not just some pie-in-the-sky theoretical ideas. They've worked for Virginia. They work in states. They work in countries. And we can reinvigorate the entrepreneurial spirit of America if we spark a real American comeback, and it's based on more competitive, empowering tax policies, reasonable regulations, and productive energy policies, and having the federal government staying focused on its primary responsibility. So thank you for allowing me to share these thoughts with you. And obviously, I would love to work for you to effectuate these positive ways that the federal government can improve prosperity here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Thank you all so much.